And thank you, Dan. That was awesome, a hard act to follow. And thank you to the organizers today and everybody who's come. It's pretty much a thrill to be back here in Amsterdam and part of the community again. So following on the heels of that great talk about communities and Kubernetes and how we all managed to come here together, I'm going to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart. If you don't know me, you will soon by the end of this, and you'll understand how we are all connected in some way, shape, or form. And I'm going to share my lessons learned about searching for connections across the cloud-native ecosystem. My name is Diane Mueller. I am the Director of Community Development for Red Hat's cloud platform, which means everything from all of the CNCF projects, Kubernetes, OpenShift, which is I'll talk a tiny bit about that, and managing all of the relationships to all of you, all of the upstream projects, and all of the other pieces and parts that come into anybody who's creating a Kubernetes platform or a Kubernetes distribution. And so for the past 5 years or almost 6 years now, I've been at Red Hat working on community management, developer advocacy teams, and building out relationships with all of you. So I would say today, if you find one friend, you're not doing enough. You need to find at least 10 friends today. So one thing, you don't have to read the fine print about me. I'm originally have a background in data science and data analytics, as well as Python. My Twitter handle is Python DJ. So I'm going to bring a little bit of data science to the art of community and try and explain how all of us are connected. For me and for most everybody in the room, I suspect, and especially people at Red Hat, it's all about open source. It's all about creating open communities and doing collaboration in the open. And I strongly believe that it's making those connections that are driving the continuous innovation and creating the over-the-air stuff that Dan was just talking about, to making the platforms and the technologies and to doing that. But it's all about, for me, and I think for all of us, about those connections. And it's probably the most important thing to think about today as you're meeting and mingling. When we talk about open source at Red Hat, we always use this metaphor of it's in our DNA. And DNA is a nicely structured, they've decoded DNA strands, they've done all kinds of interesting things, but it's got a structure and it's kind of, predictable in a sense. And there's millions of projects out there, and we have this wonderful metaphor, but I would have that it's much more like jellyfish. So each of those projects in the tentacles are interwoven and touch on each other and interact with each other and propel each other or repel each other and have tons of interdependencies. So I'm going to keep using this jellyfish metaphor. And I'll explain what I mean with this diagram here. So if you look at this, and this is just Kubernetes, OpenShift, which is a Kubernetes platform, and a few of the other CNCF projects that are shown in a network analysis diagram. So each of the little dots on there represents one of you. And the bigger the dot in some of the diagrams that I'm going to show, the more contributions, the more touch points you have in the data set. And the little bits in between Kubernetes and OpenShift show the people who made contributions or made a mention on a mailing list or somewhere that also had an interaction with Kubernetes. So you start to see how every one of these projects is interconnected. And so someone who's working on OpenShift, maybe working on Kubernetes, maybe working on Prometheus. So it's really every one of the projects that are under the CNCF, under OCI, the Open Container Initiative, that are working on Linux, we're all connected in some way. We have these huge interdependencies. And just a fun fact, I'm looking at these data sets and things, but for jellyfish, we have 2,000 known jellyfish in the world, and they suspect there's over 300,000 other jellyfish out there that we have not identified yet. And I would say in GitHub, if you look at all those repos, those 96 million repos, there are at least 300,000 other cloud-native projects that we haven't even touched on or connected with yet, that we need to raise up, find visibility of, make a connection to, and figure out how they work into our projects and our efforts. Because for me, one, it's historically, we can look at all this data, but I also want to see from a community development, from an innovation, from a collaboration point of view, where the puck is going. So I'm giving away where I'm from. I'm from Canada. So we have a wonderful gentleman, Wayne Gretzky, wonderful hockey player. If you don't know him, talk to me later. I don't know him either, but I do have an affection for him. But he always talks about to skate to where the puck is going and not to where it's been. And so I think when you look at these connections are great indicators of where we're spending our time, where we're putting our contributions in, what we're talking about, how we can look at this stuff. So from a community manager point of view or community development person, one of the things that we need to look at is who are in our networks, where do we need to nurture those people and those connections. And so today I would have you, this is a nurturing environment to create engaged connections. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we apply at Red Hat data science to community development to figure out how to do that with connections and contributions, and give you a little short history lesson to back up what I'm talking about. This is also the basis of a paper that I just wrote with a gentleman from Bitergia that's an IEEE publication that's coming out shortly, so I'll send a link out for that. And how we're adapting our community models and applying these tools and use some dynamic community personas to do that. So OKD, if you don't know, I'm just going to quickly through. OKD is the Kubernetes distribution under the hood from OpenShift. It sits out in a repo in GitHub land under Origin. We rebranded it from Origin to OKD for obvious reasons. Somebody owns the Kubernetes copyright of the brand, so we have to use acronyms. It's a wonderful thing. And what came about, some of the research that I'm doing came about because the dashboards weren't showing connections. There's lots of lovely dashboards that can show statistics on how many people, who's done the most contributions to each of the projects. Those are good things. Vendors love them. My corporate masters love them too. But and there's lots of them, but they don't show connections. They show how many contributions. So part of what the reality check for us, and this is just being honest, when we look at OKD and the repo there and our singular project, and when we focus on just our own stuff, we can see that Red Hat dominates the contributions to our repo, especially when I remove all the bots that are doing updates and things. But there are about 80 companies that are contributing external to Red Hat, and that's our one little group of people working on it. But OKD is really not about that single project. It's a distribution, it is a platform, it feeds OpenShift Online, OpenShift Dedicated, and all the other product offerings. It's really a function of Kubernetes plus everything else. And so what shifted about 3 years ago for us in terms of community was that we started, rather than just putting everything into an OKD or an Origin repo, into the upstream Kubernetes and contributing into the different projects. We also started contributing to a lot of the different things, donating, incubating a number of projects. And we also started creating this thing called the operator framework, which was another whole group of integrations and things that run on top of OpenShift and Kubernetes. So another whole pile of relationships. Lots more jellyfish to look at. Excuse me. So all of the speakers are using the same glass, so whoever has the cold, we're all going to get it. So this is really a very rich data set to look at, because this is a lot of different people and a lot of different connections. So, and a lot of the work, and most of the work, is being done in Git. So we have all of the OpenShift data. We historically have the OpenStack data. We have all the new stuff from the operator framework and all the CNCF data. And we've pulled it together in some really interesting data sets. So it's not just the Git stuff that you're looking at in these diagrams. It's also your Slack conversations, the mailing list conversations. All of these things are part of the way we connect with each other as a community and the different things. So they help us make these connections. It's warm in here. So if we just look at tease out one of the relationships, what we're looking at here is the larger one is just OpenShift, and these are all the little connections, the people who are working both on OpenShift and on an operator of some ilk that's in the operator community repo. So we can see through the connections how things are starting to generate and create bigger. And each of the dots represent a contributor. Each of the little blue diagrams is a different project or a repo. And we can keep, and as a person doing community development, if you can imagine, I went from having one project that I was looking at, and I had to scale myself so that I could connect or figure out what the connections were to all of you and how we were connected. These kinds of toolings with data science tools allow us to figure out who that big connector dot is in the center, and if that is someone who needs to be nurtured, or we have a new person coming into the community, how we can make a connection with that person to do so. Excuse me. So what I've been using the data science on you, trying to figure out who all of you are, is to start looking at these diagrams and diving into them. And I'm just going to share a couple of stories of the way that we're connected here. So a while ago, Jaeger was donated to the CNCF by people at Uber and other people who were working on it. And so we started teasing out the Uber relationship, and I was involved a little bit in the CNCF process to get it there. So I met a few of the people. And one of the things I'm also going to say is you need a little bit of domain knowledge to understand these data points. You just can't go in raw. You kind of got to know that there is some existing thing, because otherwise you'd have all of the GitHub repos in the world. And so if we look at these like 3 little points of connection here, who are they? And we dive into them. Now, I knew some of the people from the Jaeger world. I knew the gentleman who was the lead for it. I knew a few of them. But I didn't know that, until I looked at the data set, that Greg Swift, right here, was even looking at Jaeger. So it's not the things you know, and it's not the things you don't know. It's the things you really didn't even know existed. Like, I had no idea that Greg was working on this. Turns out Greg from LogDNA had just like 2 weeks before won, or not won, but earned an OpenShift Community Award for being one of the most active Slackers and people doing tech support on OpenShift. And so these are the kinds of things that you don't expect to find. But if you look at things as opposed to piles of individual contributions, and you start looking at the connections we're making, we start to see who we have that we can ask to talk about Jaeger, to explain it to someone else, to nurture, to do more work on a project. And these connections become really essential in nurturing and creating new innovative communities. If we start looking at someone like Yuri, who is the founder or one of the leads on the Jaeger project, and we tease out that relationship. They've done a lot of work on Jaeger, and then they had this magical database called M3DB that was is in the process of being worked on and being part of the operator framework. So every one of you, every project that Uber is working on is connected in some way and built in some way on top of other people's projects and interconnected. So the way to explore those is through some of these network analysis. And you can come to these events, and you'll meet a ton of people, and you'll have that 6 degrees of separation experience. You'll be able to meet someone who knows someone who knows someone else. But there are so many other relationships that in order to scale it, we need to start looking at some of these extended relationships. And the one thing I would encourage you to realize that it's not just about the actual code contribution. So a lot of us focus on trying to get people to contribute, to add stuff, but it's also about sharing that information through presentations like the ones you'll see the rest of today, sharing it online through videos and blogs, and on the mailing list, answering questions. And people like Amadeus, which is a big Kubernetes contributor, also a contributor to OKD and OpenShift, they do a ton of work on that. And we can see how they're also working not just on our projects or on OpenShift, but also on Containerd, on Jaeger, and Open Tracing and Kubernetes. And these are the kind of relationships that you'll walk away from here today building, and that I hope that you'll find someone who can connect you to someone else. So 10 friends is probably a good thing to walk away from here. And I'll just, everybody probably has heard, and there's probably a few IBMers, my new colleagues in the room, at least one. So we, as sort of a bit of a hoot, we started taking a look and just applying the same technology to see who was in Red Hat working on projects and who was in IBM working on the same projects. And we can see that, there's a lot of overlap, and in some places there isn't. So it's, these kinds of tools and these kinds of understandings of how the community relationships that help us build these communities and create these community days, and also find speakers for these community days and other ones on topics. And so if you have any connections that you're looking to make, spend some time. I'll be here the rest of the day, and I'm happy to help connect you or introduce you to someone here today who probably knows somebody else, and drill down on a bit more of this. Because it may be about the projects, but it's really, from my point of view, it's really about the people who are involved in those projects and making those connections with those people. And so that's really what we're all here today to do, is to try and build out that group of jellyfish tentacles and reach out to each other without stinging. So we have a code of conduct, and without harming anyone else, but also to make those connections and to use this time wisely and help drive more connections and more innovations into the project. So that's what we're here today to do, is to create more communities that are connected with each other, to understand that there are new models coming out for community development that are ecosystem-based, that are across multiple projects. We're here to promote peer-to-peer interactions, whether it's through, on my side of the fence, on Commons briefings or CNCF talks and all of this stuff, but to really help you get connected to each other. And that's really our job. Because just really to throw one last jellyfish up here, that self-illuminating bioluminescence, but to throw a little bit more light on this whole thing. No company is working on just one thing. If you're only working on one thing, you're building on all of the other technologies under the hood that we're also still maintaining and supporting. We have a lot of work to do in terms of coordinating all the upstream projects. So if someone from another project reaches out to you and asks you for your timeline, your release schedule, it's probably there's a dependency. And so sharing that information and coordination is really essential. And the relationships you make today and at other events of this nature really matter. Having the face-to-face time, having those human connections is really important. Again, you can't do this without some domain knowledge, so learn as much as you can today, connect with people who can share that knowledge with you. And what we all really need to do is, in addition to identifying with tools like these, but is to nurture those connections. It's really essential. And for me, keeping that data accurate and updated is really essential too. So the next thing that we're probably going to start working on with some of these data points is probably doing some predictive analysis. So not just looking where you're all migrating, what projects, but trying to predict that. So I'm hoping that we'll get to that in the next generation of the data analytics we do, and I'll come back and I'll share that with you next time. So thank you for your time, and really enjoy the day, and try and make more than one connection, at least 10 today.
I started with one.